Bree from New York, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Show you what I do. So just the thing that I wanted to ask was, there's a lot of fear. Well, it's not fear, but it seems like there is like a weird situation where they're saying that they'll primary any Republican who goes against Trump, which doesn't seem like it works very well for them generally.
Yeah.
So that's really what I want just to hear y'all talk about, because it seems like a very strange situation considering the situation with Kari Lake and everything that just seems to not really, I don't know, it doesn't seem like they have a good track record for that.
I welcome
and
it.
Second,
right. We saw without oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you. Keep going.
It's okay. I have to cut off the line here, but I just wanted to say that I want a Majority Report hats. I have been saying this for weeks, but if we could just get one of those on the merch store, I would buy it, and I bet other people would too. That's it.
All right. Emma Majority hats on the merch store.
You're playing the game called capitalism.
I think the difference in terms of the primaries this year, now, them primarying people is definitely, I think, helpful from our perspective, because the more that they primary, the more Trumpy they get, and not being Trump, the greater the tendency is that they lose. This year around, I think it would be with Elon Musk financing these primaries. And I think the threat is, the threat's always been there. This is the thing that is dictating the Republican Party now. And so, I'm not surprised by it.
But I
want to note, like, Trump's doesn't have a great record intervening in Republican primaries.
No. This is the thing that, like, what's getting me frustrated about some of these postmortems about especially trans people, where they are there's a lot of people in media who are just ceding territory to the Republicans and think that, oh, it must have been something in the message. When Trump was blowing the microphone and talking about Arnold Palmer's dick size, like, that must have really resonated with people. Like, no. In 2022, they ran on anti-trans stuff. They got shellacked. And, like, it's a fair point to say the Republicans, there was no red wave, and so they failed by their own absurdly high standards in terms of backlash against Biden, but they still didn't do that well. And the proof is in the pudding, and Shapiro winning in Pennsylvania and other races around the country, Bolduc losing. The point is just that it's not the ideas. I mean, it's the branding that Trump has. And he was able to turn out a lot of voters that just showed up and just voted for him. And I think the thing that people need to recognize is, like, the presidential election's a whole different beast, especially in the internet age. We're even past the television age, where we talk about how Nixon looked so sweaty next to JFK. This is about visibility, and Trump understands that all press is good press, and that's, I think, part of what got him to this point. It's not the Republican brand. People hate both party establishments.
Well, I will also say that I think, we need to wait until we get really better data on who voted and why. Like, how many people went from being a Biden voter to a Trump voter, and how many new voters Trump brought out. Beyond, I mean, this is the thing I think that people don't understand fully, is in terms of, like, how Harris performed, because she did get greater vote totals in, I think, 3 of the swing states than Biden did. But we don't know if she got a higher or smaller percentage of the potential electorate at that time, because we need more sophisticated sort of data that's going to come in probably like 4 or 5 months when people get a hold of voter files and whatnot. Because early on, one of the things I think that the Biden administration or the Biden campaign was counting on was that the cohort of voters who had voted for Biden in 2020 grew. And the cohort of voters who had voted most overwhelmingly for Trump shrunk. Mm-hmm. They were anticipating that younger people would make up a bigger portion of the pie. Older people would make up a smaller portion of the pie relative to 2020. We haven't seen that data fully yet, and we won't for a bit. But I mean, clearly Trump did better with younger people, but Harris should have done that much better. Like Biden anticipated that if he was 65-35 with people between 18 and 35, this time around, he could be 55-45 with those people and still win because that cohort was going to get that much bigger. I'm just throwing out arbitrary numbers. But my point being that there was also a failure in the way that Harris ran. And again, Biden should have gotten out of the race a year and a half ago. And so there was not as much margin for error, frankly, for Harris. But it was the Biden people who came in, some of the old school Democratic consultant class who have continually lost over and over again, came in. Here is David Plouffe. And I think, like, you know, you talk about Trump's branding. It's not ideological as much as it is insider, outsider, or I mean, basically insider, outsider.
Yeah.
And Trump, because was aided in being perceived as an outsider because the Democrats spent all this time saying like he was unique, MAGA instead of Republican. And so they were basically building him up as an outsider throughout this entire thing. And in 2020, they didn't have to worry about it because he was already the president.
And
this time around, they basically said he was an outsider. And here is David Plouffe completely not understanding this dynamic.
Just talk a little about why you decided to do the stuff with Cheney, whether you saw any blowback at all in your data.
Well, first of all, you know, like any organization, you know, that's got the resources in the private sector, or in this case in politics, you make as many decisions as you can based on data by the marketplace. Okay. So, you know, turnout was up in Milwaukee, was down a little bit in Philadelphia and Detroit. But, you know, we'd spent a lot of time with voters who we were concerned weren't going to vote. And the fact that Liz Cheney was supporting Kamala Harris was not an issue raised by any of them. OK, so I'd say a couple of things. We were in a challenging political environment.
All right, pause it for a second. Pause it. First off, when you say
Nobody complains.
first off, when you say he starts off by saying data is really the way that you go by it. Right. OK, well, here's some data that you just stated. Numbers were up in Milwaukee, but down in Philadelphia and Detroit. So in other words, whatever it is that you did as a campaign, because you worked in those 3 different cities, didn't work. Likely whatever somebody did in Milwaukee worked, but not what you as a campaign did, because you were 1 for 3 out of those cities. And the only thing difference between that city and the other 2 cities you were working on was that maybe there was a better machine in Wisconsin. Maybe that's Ben Wickler doing that.
Something to keep in mind with the DNC chair race, by the way.
So, like, he should not have brought that up in support of any argument he was making that they made right decisions. But of course, people who don't tend to vote aren't going to necessarily bring up a Liz Cheney. But I tell you who will bring up Liz Cheney, all the people whose job it is to get those people to vote. All the activists, all the community workers, all the people in the community who you rely on to drive those people out to vote, they know who Lynn Cheney is. Liz Cheney and Lynn Cheney. They know who both the Cheneys are and their her husband, father. And they're the ones who are depressed by that. They're the ones who are aware that progressive ideas were being shunted aside, or at least being downplayed, you know, in favor of this person. And and you want to get people out to vote. You need to give them a reason. And what she was essentially taking up the space of a reason for people to vote.
She was supposed to be a signal about January 6th, right? And at the time I was like, okay, maybe they have data showing this works. But turns out the people that knew about Liz Cheney's involvement in like putting, you know, saying Trump lost the election in 2020 were 100% of that pool were probably already high propensity voters that Harris already had. For the low propensity people that broke for Trump in a way that turned the election in his favor, and it exacerbated an existing weakness for her, which was the genocide in Gaza. Right. So what it looks like is she's going around and campaigning with the most murderous butcher of Muslim and Arab people that's still living in this country. That person's daughter, and they don't know, about like January 6th or whatever and her role there. Like, that's what DC people know about. They see Cheney and they go, God, why we're doing this horrible crap, and Harris isn't distancing herself from Biden, and like, she's campaigning with the Cheney too. Well, I guess he must be anti-war by default.
And the way that these people have their feelers out, the only thing they know is what they can ask people on a survey question. So nobody complained about Liz Cheney, so therefore it's fine. I guess maybe we got more of this clip.
You guys are the data people. It was their job to determine if the Cheney thing was more of a gain or a loss. And we don't have access to that information. And now it's abundantly clear that they were wrong in their bet.
Well, and of course, go ahead.
Couple of things. We were in a challenging political environment where to get to 50% of the vote in enough states to win 270 electoral votes, we needed some percentage of Republicans. But I think what people forget is it's more the independents who act like Republicans, where issues of democracy, of how unhinged he is, Project 2025 mattered to them, even to some conservative Democrats. Also, when you're being attacked as being a crazy out-of-touch California liberal, when you have generals and former Republican elected officials saying, I'm for Kamala Harris, that helps rebut that. In many respects, that'll be more effective than what she would say.
Okay, pause it. Go ahead.
We know that this entire strategy, the tactics may have worked, but the strategy failed miserably. Whatever data they had as a business person, according to him, was flawed data. It did not work. And the entire premise is wrong, too, because all they did, again, by bringing out all these establishment Republicans to say to Republicans, Donald Trump is not one of you, all they did was basically hype Donald Trump as the change agent and the outsider. And they fundamentally misunderstood this moment. And it's not just this moment. I mean, it's been 10 years.
We had the same conversation in 2016.
Exactly.
What was the point you just made? I had something. If you could just go back briefly, I lost it out of my brain.
A crazy out-of-touch California liberal.
Oh, okay.
When you have
there we go. I'm sorry. So, okay, then if that's her perception, which I am sympathetic to the idea that they wanted to make her look more moderate based on that perception, but a lot of that's already baked in based on those identifiers that we've talked about, right? California, woman of color. The fundamental problem is that she was susceptible to this because all this same campaign staff, which she ended up taking over the 107 days that she ran for office, was complicit in the sidelining of Kamala Harris as to not shed a light on how completely brain dead Biden is at this point. They did not set her, as Ested Herndon pointed out with you, Sam, they did not set her up for success. When she performed well in focus groups, they were saying things like, well, it's the message that works, and anybody delivering Biden's message would be getting these numbers in focus groups. So they went into this by basically having her be a blank slate that was so poorly defined. And then the way that they chose to define her was everything that fit their priors, which is losing Democratic Party centrist politics that he's outlining here and showing no self-reflection about. Keep going.
Is there any more?
Generals and former Republican elected officials saying, I'm for Kamala Harris, that helps rebut that. In many respects, that'll be more effective than what she would say herself. And then as it relates to, the comments about, wanting generals like Hitler, that bothered voters. OK, this is something that concerned them about, OK, he seems like he's lost a step. He seems a little more unhinged, unstable. The people who worked for him last time are warning us, And now he says something like this. So, yeah, we could have
I just
decided
also,
to
I'm
ignore
sorry
that.
to interrupt this, but the other thing you can notice about this is the question was, what do you regret, more or less, campaigning with Liz Cheney? And again, it's not like this was just like, well, one time went out. Like the entire end of the campaign was essentially focused around Liz Cheney. And if you notice, everything he's saying is about trying to make Donald Trump look worse in the eyes of the voters. This is 8 years after he wins in 2017. Like, none of it is talking about what Kamala Harris is going to do.
Yeah.
None of it. None of it. And the theory that Trump is worse than you thought. Like, I mean, just you're trying to communicate either to people, to low propensity voters, right? Because if you're a high propensity voter and you're a high information voter, you know all you need to know about Donald Trump.
Yep.
But now you're bringing out, Liz Cheney to speak to low information voters. And again, all you're saying to these low information voters are these Republicans you've never heard of because you're a low information voter, low propensity voter. These Republicans you've never heard of are only basically saying he's not a real Republican. And so it's giving permission to these voters to go like, good, I want to get rid of the establishment regardless of who it is. I mean, it's just so internally inconsistent.
Yeah, it's one thing to bring out, say they brought out Adam Kinzinger, Sam. Wouldn't love it. Would have been better than the Cheney thing because of what I just said about they're speaking to different audiences. Like Matt said this off mic, they're so in the news.
Yep.
You guys know what Liz Cheney's role was on January 6th.
And what Joe Scarborough was saying about Hitler. Like, nobody pays attention. People are living their life.
You guys know that she got ousted because she decided that, like, the election was Biden won the election. But the voters that you're trying to target, or should have been trying to target, don't know that. So they're like, they don't even know how to speak to the voters that they needed.
Yep.
And now he says something like this. So, yeah, we could have decided to ignore that and just say, let's talk about tax cuts today. I don't think that would have advanced the ball with the people we needed to advance it with. And again, I just want to, again, it can sound like making excuses. This political environment sucked, okay? We were dealing with ferocious headwinds. And I think people's instinct was to give the Republicans and even Donald Trump another chance. So we had a complicated puzzle to put together here in terms of the voters. And it was going to take a little bit more independent Republicans than we saw in 20, maybe 1% more Republican voters for us. It was going to take voters saying, even though I judged Trump's first term favorably, I'm more concerned about him this time. We had to get more voters to say that. So, and if you look at how we closed, I think we did one day with Liz Cheney in the last couple of weeks. You look at the ads we ran. They were heavily centered on the economy, on tax cuts, on Trump being for the wealthy. So this notion that somehow we weren't focused on the economy, that was the driving motivation and message in our campaign. The closing speech, yes, it took place at the Ellipse, was a huge contrast on the economy and the people Donald Trump would fight for and the people Kamala Harris would fight for. So I think that mistakes, I think my concern about that is just, again, we have to understand that what happened in this election and what didn't. And, I think at the end of the day, we had to raise people's concern and the threat level of a Trump second term. I think if you look at our internal data, and Gwen can speak to this, we did a lot of that. We just didn't get it to the extent that we needed to
I'm sorry,
win.
can you pause it?
But at the end of the day,
Okay, so why didn't voters buy that? Because they did spend a ton of time on negatively characterizing Trump. Why didn't they buy that?
$1 billion toward it.
And they're right on the fact that, like, yes, their closing ads were focused on the economy, and that was part of why I was optimistic going into the race. But the problem is that for the voters they needed, none of this was reaching them. None of it. It wasn't either. It also was not coherent, which was the other issue. But it wasn't like the speech on the ellipse. They're trying to win the MSNBC and CNN cycle over trying to win over voters. It is astounding. And I mean, I guess it's just not a shock now, but I just am still in awe, I think, in hearing him about how little these consultants understand about the people that they're trying to win over.
I mean, according to a poll that was released, I guess, about 5 days ago from data from Progress. Was this 5 days ago? Yeah, November 22nd or so. It cost Harris enthusiasm amongst independents. I mean, look, here's the bottom line. They failed. They had one job and they failed. They did the opposite. They did the opposite. It was a very tough environment. They failed. They're not up to it. Do not hire these people anymore. That's the point. These people are failures. There is no other job where you get to fail. And it's not like, well, it worked a little bit, but not as much as we thought. No, it did the opposite. Her numbers went down after this is in Michigan and Pennsylvania. They went down after they campaigned with Cheney.
But also what I find frustrating about this is their theory contradicts everything known about politics, which is what I was saying the entire time about medium voters. Is it's not people switching from party affiliation because the brand because this time is different. It's, are people going to sit on the couch and turn out for you, or are they not? And I think there might have been some switches, but if you look at the numbers, it's pretty clear that there was a depressed turnout in a lot of areas that Harris could have turned out, and maybe a slight uptick for Trump in certain areas, and because people were depressed. And I think it's just...
And the genocide is a big part of that, even though, and by the way, do you know how many times Pluff mentioned Gaza in this? 0. Because it's not like, you're not going to see that maybe directly in the data. And Sam's been saying this the whole time. But it's the depression, and it's like oh, God, I can't vote for these guys. And do we have the part about Harris not distancing herself from Biden? Like, that's the other part of this interview from number 3? Because I think that's the other relevant piece, right? Which is that I don't know if she even could as VP. Like, it's just clear. I mean, I don't know. She could have tried, but the fact that she's his vice president, I think, did present a difficult choice. But the Cheney thing exacerbated his biggest issue, which is the underlying thing for these voters, especially voters of color who ended up switching a little to Trump, is you're funding a genocide right now. Right.
And you've just brought one of the avatars, the closest working avatar, right? I guess if she had brought out Dick Cheney and campaigned with Dick Cheney, it would have been worse. But it's hard to say who you could have evoked. You evoked Dick Cheney, and to do that in the course of essentially funding another war on Muslim and Arabs in that region is it just fits too perfectly. And the amazing thing about this is that none of them touch the question of Gaza because it's so glaring. Is it hard for you? She's going to go through this, Stephanie Cutter. She's going to go through it's difficult to, Harris didn't want to nitpick different things over the course of the 4 years. Okay, completely understandable. You bought into it. But now there's something really, really big and really, really sort of custom tailored for you to say is different. And Biden has gone out there and just said full-throated, I'm a Zionist, I don't care about what happens. There was such a custom-tailored way to achieve two things. Show that you're different from Biden, show that you're different in a way that is going to make a big difference, not only as a first-order matter to people who are voting based upon that, but as a second-order matter to activists who care about it and are demoralized in their attempt to go and get votes for you. I mean, when something's this close, and it's not as close as it was in 2020 or 2016, You look back at why she got that first burst of excitement. It was because she was not Biden. And then she spent the rest of the campaign trying to be Biden. Here's Stephanie Cutter.
On the Biden question, we of course got that everywhere we went. And we knew what the data was. We knew we had to show her as her own person and point to the future and not try to rehash the past. She also felt that she was part of the administration. And unless we said something like, well, I would have handled the border completely differently, we were never going to satisfy anybody. We were trying to tell a story and give the impression that she was different without pointing to a specific issue.
Can I ask this why not a specific issue? Is it something she was unwilling to do?
Pause it 1 second. Colin from Washington says, I'm desperately sorry. I appreciate you guys, but Gaza explains a fraction of the voting electorate, but it's a microcosm for the larger issue. That's the point.
Yeah.
You just heard Stephanie Cutter saying we're trying to tell a story. And to tell a story, to develop a narrative, you don't need to do anything except for be able to have a metaphor, right? Like, had she said we will uphold U.S. law, and there's reason to believe that, from my perspective, that Israel is stopping humanitarian aid going in, or we believe there needs to be more attention to Gaza, or whatever it is. However she would have, or just have a Palestinian speaker at the DNC. And this feeds into a narrative, and a narrative can be built upon it. But she couldn't find even a single metaphor anywhere else to which to build a narrative on. So that's the point. Is again, when I say first order, that's how many votes were directly a function of this. But then second order and even third order. There are a lot of votes that are left on the table, and you don't need that much for those 3 states.
And she mentions immigration as her example, right? Where it's like, that's a funny one to pick, because you know who's successfully branded themselves around one issue, basically? Donald Trump, since he came down that escalator, has been branding his politics based on immigration. And that's the one that they choose to say, like, oh, how could we differentiate herself from Biden on? No. There were bigger issues where you could have branded yourself as distinct from him. Anyway, but keep going.
And let's be clear. This is about these people. And yes. We'll talk about this in a second, because it's fascinating that they decided to go on Pod Save America to talk about this.
This is so discrediting.
Trying to tell a story and give the impression that she was different without pointing to a specific issue.
Can I ask this why not a specific issue? Is it something she was unwilling to do? I mean, you worried it would feel disingenuous?
She felt like she was part of the administration, so why should she look back and cherry pick some things that she would have done differently when she was part of it? She had tremendous loyalty to President Biden. You've been on plenty of campaigns. Imagine if we said, well, we would have taken this approach on the border. Imagine the round of stories coming out after that of people saying, well, she never said that in a meeting, or what meeting when she said this, or I remember when she did that.
Okay,
and
pause it. They are saying Biden people were going to leak to sabotage her if she threw Biden under the bus. That is the implication of what she just said.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think she's right, though. I think she's right.
I think she's right, but that's, an indictment of this entire Biden political apparatus, which is
there's
junk.
Always people who are going to do CYA. But the point is that they were afraid of this. But they should have welcomed this. Yeah. Because the idea that this is the thing that, and she's just using immigration because that's a safe thing to use. What she's really using that as a substitute for is Gaza. Yeah. I mean, let's be clear on this. Because I don't know what the difference is that she would have argued in terms of immigration. But she is using it as Gaza. And yes, it is the case that there would be people who would say, well, she didn't say this in a meeting. She never complained about it or whatever, because they're trying to protect their own ass. You know, Brett McGurk is out there. He's going to try and push back on this stuff, and they're going to leak. There's no doubt that's going to happen. But if you are trying to create a narrative that you are not Joe Biden, you welcome that. You say, we're going to use this. It is the case that she's different. And yes, she was loyal, but now she's running for president. and she's going to articulate things that she would not have done in that moment because she is being loyal to the president. That's what you do. And the minutia that Stephanie Cutter is talking about shows how completely a closed loop they're working in. It's from like Morning Joe all around to these consultants on that podcast who all go there together. They go there together because they're going to do a united front. We're not going to throw each other under the bus because we all need to get work next year.
Yep.
And this is what's going on. This is a consultant class of Democrats who have, like the same closed loop. I got news for you. Those voters out there are not reading the Hill. This whole thing about winning the day and winning the news cycle, as if it's Politico in the year 2004 or whatever, is really just completely a blinkered notion of what's going on with campaigning today. These people are old in the way that they're thinking. They're ossified and they're overpaid, and they failed now multiple times.
But okay, go Matt.
December 2nd, 2016 in CBS News, the headline, "Rather lose than win the way you did. Insults fly when Trump and Clinton aides meet." There's Jen Paul Mary basically saying, and that's the thing is when they're talking about loyalty, that's your careerism. The job is to be president of the United States of America, and we're talking you failed, and she was not ready to be president if you can't even throw that old MFer under the bus.
But this is the theme of the whole. I mean, again, I'm not trying to absolve. I don't think she's a weak leader in terms of leading a political movement. She didn't have the stuff to combat all of the crap that was thrown at her in this way. But this whole staff of advisors that put their personal loyalty to Biden, or at least that's what they're saying, and she did too, over just a political movement to make people's lives better, especially in the face of what we were facing. They don't want to win, as Matt was saying, in a way that would say, okay, Biden failed in some way. That was the thing. And I returned to that instead anecdote about how they were very arrogant about the message is a good one. So it's not about who communicates it. We're going to win on this message, and we're going to win in this way. So that's part of why she didn't throw Biden under the bus, is because the entire staff of people are filled with arrogant folks that say, and they're paid to because it's actually like a cozy bedtime story for these Democratic politicians. Everything you're doing is awesome. It's just the way that we win the news cycle. And that's an institutional rot that I think it's hard for us to, even from the outside, fully understand.
All right, just play a little bit more of this.
Wasn't going to give us what we needed, because it wouldn't be a clean break. It would be, days upon days in a limited time window that we had of dealing of who, what, when, where. So the best we could do, and the most that she felt comfortable with, was saying, look, vice presidents
trying to blame it
never
on
break
her.
with their presidents. The only time in recent memories when Pence broke with Trump after Trump stormed the Capitol.
No.
Hubert Humphrey on September 30th said we need to stop this Vietnam bombing policy, and the entire media atmosphere or environment acted like because the draft is gone, there's no comparison. I'm sorry, there was a comparison. And I am also frustrated at this repeated repetition of, we had a limited time. You know what would have been better for the Kamala Harris campaign? If it was even more limited. If it was right after Biden got out of the race and then the election happened, because that gave these people that gave these people less time to F it up.
Yep.
Yeah. October was a disaster.
All right. Do we need to? I don't want to.
Yeah, we're just getting madder and madder.
All right. We're going to take a phone call, and then we're going to go to the break.
You said we were going to cover this, Sam, and I said, really, right before Thanksgiving? I mean, I am about to drink so much red wine and just lay into some centrist Democrats at the Thanksgiving table. I hope you're happy about this.
Well, I guess I am. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.